So when we were thinking about how we want to end this day, which has been a fabulous day, thank you everyone, and the speakers have been amazing. At the time we were organizing it, there was a Twitter discussion happening, was quite passionate about titles, information architect. Is that still relevant? And so that's where this idea for this panel came up. And we thought, who do we want in DC to be on this panel? What's our dream panel? And so we got them, and they're here. But you all are also our dream panel, so we want to extend the conversation and not just be between the four of them, but between us all. So we want to make sure you have time for that. So I'm Natalie Buda Smith, Chief of Design at the Library of Congress. My initial passion for information architecture came from building the user experience team at Navigation Arts. We were the architects of the user experience, so we kind of got away with both being information architects and user experience designers at the same time with that label. But that's who I am. But again, I'm going to introduce the panel. Jared Spool, who is known as the founder of User Interface Engineering, and now the latest manifestation of Center. I'm just going to go really quickly, and if you guys want to add to that, yeah, because otherwise there's so much. Honestly, I could spend all an hour just introducing who you are, which is, then we have Carrie Hane. She is founder of Tanzan, and the author of Designing Connected Content. And then next to her is Dan Brown, who is the founder of 8 Shapes, also an author of Communicating Design, Designing Together, and Practical Design Discovery. And then Fatima Akhtar, so excited that you're here, is an associate partner at IBM focused on artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. So thank you all for being here. What's great about, and Karen and I were talking about this, the theme this year is it's pretty open. And so we've been allowed to have a lot of great talks that address different types of facets of information architecture. And so I wanted to keep the questions still very high level. And so the name of this panel was, do distinctions matter anymore? Is information architecture a role, a practice, a type of work, or none of these? I want to ask a question of the audience first. How many of you identify with your primary title of information architect? How many identify as user experience designer? And we have an overflow room, and I apologize, overflow room, that we can't see you. But and then how many identify as a content strategist? How many?
What conference did you?
How many of you identify as being a developer? That's your primary title. Developer, data scientist, just designer, or visual designer. Thank you. A business analyst, and other. Is there any others? Oh, there's a lot of others. There you go, Dan. And then just another curiosity, how many of you work for consulting firms or agencies? How many are internal or at a federal agency? Oh, great, about half. Wonderful. So I wanted to ask the panel, what title do you currently use? And do you use other titles in different contexts? Does anybody want to start? Yeah, exactly.
My title and the title of everybody at Center UIE is Maker of Awesomeness.
So at IBM, for sure, I do change my title with the audience that I'm talking to, primarily because that is how they're going to connect with me, and that is how I can make sure that I connect with them as well. So yes, associate partner is my official title, but that means nothing to anybody outside of IBM. And so when I'm talking to somebody outside of IBM, I'd like to explain what I do. And at times it will be emerging technologies because that's what they're focused on. At times it may be more UI, UX, or design thinking, which is something that IBM is big on. And so it may be how I connect with them and what I want to use to connect with my audience.
Good answer.
I think most often, if in the professional world, I identify as a content strategist. But that changes to people I meet on the street, like literally that someone stopped me the other day, and I'm like, I'm a web consultant. So people can think whatever that is, and if they care to know, then I'll explain more of what I do, and it all comes down to help people figure out what content to put on their website, and they all go, that's important. I'm like, you'd think. Not so many businesses think that, apparently. But none of the ones you work for, right?
I think context matters, right? So here we are. So as Fatima said, I like that. I change my title based on the need. If I'm talking to you all, I can say I self-identify as an information architect. And one of the reasons why I do that is because I need you all, like when we meet, to know that's the part I like thinking about, right? That's the part of user experience that grabs my attention the most, that maybe I think I'm best at. But if I'm meeting a new client, I will say I'm a user experience designer, because they need to know my firm can handle all aspects of their user experience design.
Does using the label information architect provide any advantage or value when you do use that label in that context? Do you find, like, what is that value it brings?
I don't know. I guess existentially, it helps us remember that there's aspects to this work that are still very much, let's call it, under the hood, or structural in nature, or abstract in nature. So again, in these kinds of conversations, I like using this title because I think it's a good reminder to us that our work is multifaceted, right? And that it by design, requires us to apply lots of different ways of thinking about things. I'm just stringing words together. I don't know if that makes
It does.
No, you go first.
So as you say that, I wonder if I should start calling myself an information architect. Well, because content strategy means something different to every single person I talk to.
Oh, good thing information architecture
Yeah.
does.
Because they wouldn't know, but people know what information is, and they have a general idea of what an architect is. And maybe those words make sense. I don't know. Maybe it's an experiment to try. It certainly sounds. Sounds good.
Have you ever heard Richard Saul-Wurman talk?
No, I haven't actually.
Yes, he will tell you, he will start to define information architecture, and then about 15 minutes later, you're like talking about the Yucatan, and you're not exactly sure why we got on this topic. It's always just a string of words. I mean, here's the thing, right? Titles were invented so that HR could figure out how much to underpay women and minorities. Right? That's the basic purpose. The whole purpose of titles in a corporate environment is to figure out pay bands.
Yes.
And once you nail down pay bands and you figure out who's going to get paid more and who's going to get paid less for doing the same work, then the title gets co-opted to be used for things that it's wholly incapable of serving, which is to try and describe what we do or to try and represent who we are. But we can have 15 people who have the same title, and their overlapping skills, knowledge, and experience, what we could sum up as expertise, will not overlap hardly at all. And this is what makes hiring difficult. This is what makes explaining what we do or showing up, because the titles want to box us into things. They want to say, well, if you're the information architect, you shouldn't be doing user research, and why not, right? And so the problem, and this is why we went with having everybody in the organization having exactly the same title. When I worked years ago, I worked at a company called Symbolics. And everybody in engineering, there were 500 of us, everybody had the title of member of technical staff. And because we all had that title, it completely got us off the conversation of what was people's titles and into what do you bring to the room at this moment? What are you going to contribute? And it made that conversation very different. When I was in the first cohort at the U.S. Digital Service, and we made the explicit decision that everybody at the U.S. Digital Service would have the same title, which is Digital Services Expert. So that when you went in, nobody knew what that meant, none of us knew what it meant, and we could be whatever we wanted to be in that meeting. When we were meeting with an undersecretary, or we were meeting with, you know, a system administrator, or whoever it was, we could be that. Though, one of my coworkers, Dana Chisnell, put on her business card, generalist problem solver, and I was really wishing we had chosen that, because that was way cooler. But that's where it was. And so now we have Maker of Awesomeness. And Maker of Awesomeness is fantastic as a title because nobody knows what it means, but everybody wants it as their title. Like, oh, I want to be a Maker of Awesomeness. You are. Go for it.
So I do find that it's similar, like when you go on LinkedIn and you need to put in what you're known for, right? Like what you're known for within your company, within your organization, within the people that you work around with, may be very different than how somebody on LinkedIn or anybody on LinkedIn may be looking at you, right? So sometimes it has been like, I solve problems. That's what I do as a consultant, and you know, it is problem solver is maybe more apt of a title than anything else. A couple of years ago, when I took over my current role at IBM, where I do a lot of business development now, I was told I was going to do go to market. I was like, I don't even know what that means, and I think I spent like the first 6 months to a year actually just figuring out what that meant, right, and what my role was and how that had changed. And so sometimes titles are nebulous, right? Like they are to be figured out what that means and how are we going to interact. Where I feel the titles really come into play, or I would say the positions that come into play is when we're actually responding to government proposals, or we're responding to saying, hey, this is what somebody's role is going to be. These are the 10 things that they want to do, and we know that they can do these 10 things. You want to call it information architect, I'll call him that, right? You want to call him UX designer, we'll call him that, right? How do you identify with that? And how do we identify it? Maybe a little different. But that's really where it comes into play, I think.
It makes me think at the library, I think everyone in our directorate is a 2210, so that even makes it more obscure because we have to make our own titles because no one knows what a 2210 is. But so in line with that, what can we learn? Like, I just said a lot about the library, which is ironic, but what can we learn about a company organization by the job titles that they use or the labels in their methods?
Well, I contend you can't word anything. That it's all just, you know, just labeling for the sake of labeling, because we've created this thing where you have to have a title, and the title has to somehow be explanatory. I think, you know, the Uber driver is the ultimate sort of judge of this. And when you say, so what do you do? Oh, I'm an information architect. I've never heard of that. What is that? I mean, that's where we end up. You know, the Uber driver and the uncle at Thanksgiving are the two people who's like, I don't know. You know, I always thought that having a job at Apple working at the Genius Bar would be fantastic because, you know, my uncle at Thanksgiving would say, so you're a genius. And so, you know, and then of course the next question is, what does that pay? It's like minimum wage. I contend that we try to use titles to impress, we try to use titles to discern roles, but unfortunately, that's not the way we should be going. In fact, roles within design are problematic because once we establish that the designer designs, the information architect architects, and the researcher researches, we now create this siloed thing that is creating problems for ourselves. And what we really want to do when we're staffing and when we're building up expertise on our teams is we want to think in terms of skills. We want to think about who can do a user research session, who can create a decent wayfinding or navigation system, who can, you know, what are the different competencies that we bring to the table, and focus on the competencies, not focus on trying to come up with some title. I mean, just yesterday I was asked in a team meeting at a client about, could you explain to us the difference between UX designer and product designer? And I'm like, No, I mean, well, one has more letters, but not if you expand the abbreviations, and then the other one has more letters, and I don't know where to go from there.
I agree, I don't think you can really tell much.
Maybe you can't. But I think it's weird that we're at an information architecture conference talking about why labeling is bad. But I think there are. I like Jared's earlier point that there are motivations for creating a system of labeling, right? And I thought I was going to be the most cynical one on the panel, but I really liked Jared's perspective here. Is that the
I haven't gotten back to how this extends to colonialism and slavery. It's full of that.
we are giving you time to warm up.
Yeah.
But I think I can't tell a lot about a team. So I run an agency, and when I come in, I want to learn about the team. It is very rare that I come into a team that's big enough where they would have these kinds of specializations available, especially in this town where most of us have 2210 or whatever as our titles. But I do think I can learn about their sensibilities, right, and sort of the perspectives that they value and that they bring to the table. I see a lot of teams and I get to work with a lot of user experience designers who don't know the first thing about information architecture. And when they bring it up, that tells me something that maybe they do have a perspective that I feel like is increasingly lost in this business. And we can talk about the reasons why an IA sensibility or an IA perspective has diminished over the 3 decades that I've been doing this. But when I hear it, it gives me a little bit of hope. Like, okay, you get that this is a complicated problem and that we need to think about the abstractions about it. We need to think about the categories, the structure underneath. And that to me says a little bit more than whether their title is information architect or not.
And this question came from thinking about those new to the field. When they're making a decision between this company or this company, is there anything to glean by a company having titles, or maybe aligning with some of the concepts that you've brought up, in that if they don't have specialized titles, that tells you something. If they have a general title, that tells you something else. If they're using old titles from the 1990s, that might tell you something else.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Because I'm an old man.
Yeah.
Like, how much do newer designers give a shit about titles? Like, when I got my first job, I knew I didn't really care. And I don't know why I don't care, and I still didn't care. But I'm curious, like, what do you care about what your title is?
Yes, hey Dan.
Okay, so I think especially in this town, like there is a direct relationship between the salary that you make and what that title is. That's totally fair. I've had people come to me, I mean, at our biggest, 8 Shapes was 16 people, right? And they'll come to me and they'll say like, no, I really want to be a senior designer. And I'm like, senior to who? Like there's nobody here. But I totally get that point. There's also this idea of a trajectory that you want to paint on your resume, right? This idea that I have progressed in my career. I totally get wanting to tell that story. It's hard for me to reconcile that need with also like, what do those things really mean under the hood?
I'd say from a company perspective, especially when it comes to big companies, I think that is how you not necessarily colonialism, but that is how you show hierarchy, right? That is how you go from, okay, I'm somebody who's fresh out of college to somebody who has 10 years of experience. And those are the defined bands, and there's a defined structure to it. And more important in big companies than smaller companies, because in big companies, that's how you can show pay increases. That's how people can show that they've done more. So there's a whole host of other issues related to that, right? We have a design studio in our office here at IBM, and I don't think anybody uses the term information architecture. And they do that work, but they do content strategy as well, and they do UX work, right? At times they may be pulled into doing something completely different, so you do wear different hats. Somewhat because we don't have that big of a practice. But also because that's what's required, right? Outside of that business, how many people really understand the differences between an information architect and a UX designer, right? And so But those pay raises, those bands, those titles exist for a reason in these large organizations. If we were going to compare ourselves to a Deloitte or an Accenture, they probably use slightly different titles for saying the same thing. And this is why I actually feel that you need to dig deeper into the job skills and the description of the job than it is the title to really understand what they're asking for.
So, having the experience of in the last year starting a job board, we had a lot of discussions about titles because that's a key index item on the job description. And right now, if you go to our job board, which you can go to at uxcareers.uiu.com, you will see that we organize, we visually organize the posting by the job title. But this is actually something that's temporary for us because we realized very early on in our research in putting together the job board, we talked to a whole bunch of hiring managers, plus we had an entire year where I would just have people reply to a post that I put up every month about jobs, their open positions. And then, so we just used that as data for all the positions we were thinking about for the job board. And what we realized was there's no calibration. What somebody calls a senior designer here is just a designer over there. What somebody thinks that information architecture is separate from design, whereas other people include it in design. And for younger people, when we talk to folks who are looking for jobs, people particularly early in their career, what we found was that they were looking at job titles as the thing to get them to not apply, right? Well, I don't know if I can apply to that job. It says, you know, UI UX designer, and I'm only really UX. And so they were, the job titles were actually working against the hiring manager because people would look at that title, and some companies use their, for whatever reason, use their official pay band title. So it's like visual designer step 21, you know, or senior visual designer 2, right? Which nobody knows what that means. Oftentimes in the organization, they don't know what that means. And so they're using these labels to try and communicate these things that aren't communicating what they want. And as a result, people don't apply or people misapply and they don't get the quality of candidates they want. So in the design of the system as we go forward, we're going to focus more on what is the work that the company needs to fill and what will you do in your first year there, and then ignore the title altogether and talk about how could you fill that position, how could you contribute to what that company's trying to hire, and focus this. It's a technique known as performance-based hiring, and we're going to use that as the basis of building out a job board that's different than all the other ones because we're going to sort of deprecate title as the main descriptor of what's going on.
So now for something a little bit different, just thinking about information architecture as a practice. I've seen that more from data science, analytics, those studying what they would call it data, which I know we all do, but are traditionally going to colleges that study data science, are reaching out to our practices and saying, what is this information architecture? We're doing it, we need it, what is it? Tell us more. Has IA is it going through a resurgence because of this, or is it the same as it always was?
Well, I think the funny thing is that if we were at a data science conference and we were talking about what a data scientist is, we'd have the exact same problem. Because some data scientists are just administrators of the Google Analytics account. And some data scientists are doing creative behavioral economic studies. And some data scientists are just people who write code to get all the different databases on all the different platforms to talk to each other so that they know that this transaction went with this customer who did this behavior in this analytics tool. And that data science is grown into, is one of these labels that gets applied to things that can mean a million different things, and you have to sort of drill in to say, which flavor of data science do you use? And, you know, we like to think this is a tech-only problem, but having done a lot of work in the medical field, I can tell you that doctors get into the same arguments. You know, cardiologists and pulmonologists have this long debate as to who gets to own the thorax. And they argue over this, and exactly who is a cardiologist and who is a pulmonologist, and what defines one versus the other is way up for debate in their field. Well, we just call them doctors, and that just seems to work for us. But for them, there's no, there's a big subtlety, and cardiologists are always screwing up things that the pulmonologists have to go in and fix from their perspective.
So again, at IBM, being a technology company, data science, big thing these days, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of that, right? I actually know people who 3 years ago didn't call them data scientists, and now all of a sudden when I hear them talk, they refer to them as data scientists. That's what the world is calling it. That's what they now believe that their job is, right? Has their job really changed? I don't think so, but the title has definitely changed, right? That is the in thing. That is how we're going to refer to people who do analytics, who do, you know, work with data, who figure out user behavior, whatever it is. But in terms of, is there a resurgence of information architecture? I think there's a close relationship, right? Artificial intelligence is based on machine learning, based on really advanced analytic techniques, which needs data at its very core, right? And that data has to be tagged, it has to be understood well for that machine learning model, for that AI model to really work well. Because if that's not tagged well, and if it's not trained well, we're going to have all kinds of biases. We're going to have all kinds of other issues, right? Bias being a really, really huge one, because we can train your model with good data and only good data, and then it's only going to understand that. And if you don't really train it with subpar data, or train it with results that you don't always want, your data is going to be, your AI model is going to be very, very biased, right? And so how do you do that? And so I think there's definitely a correlation there, maybe more of an understanding. I don't think there's probably appreciation for that, that maybe needs to be there more, right? Because at the very base, that is a very important aspect of building AI models.
I say building right exactly off of that is, I don't know that it's in resurgence, but it needs to be. And certainly not the title of information architect, which has just gone down. I know fewer people who call them information architects today than I did 10 years ago. But we need information architecture more than ever, because all of that information that's out in the world on computers all across the world, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. Somehow it needs to slow down, and I feel like information architecture is one of the ways when people can start seeing the structure of the information, seeing what that information is, and I think that's what the practice is it's making that information relevant to other people. It's sense making, it's place making, it's all of that stuff. So it needs to be resurgent, and I don't know how that happens though, because that has to be through people. And I feel like, we just asked how many people identify as information architects at the World IA Day, and it was a small number. But you don't have to be called an information architect to practice information architecture. But I think it's, we could have a whole discussion about how to do that, but you know how many times I just saw it this week, the IA, and all they're talking about is the menu. And that's what IA has become for so many people, and it's so much more than that. So I don't know how we do that, but it needs to happen, and more people need to be doing it, and probably every UX designer needs to do it. Probably UI designers, all kinds of data scientists. There's all kinds of ways to structure information and architect it.
I liked one of the last points that you just made, which is that we didn't ask you all, do you practice information architecture? Because as we talked about, I feel like that moment is past. I feel like they don't want to answer any more questions. But you know what?
People hate raising their hands in a little survey.
How many people, raise your hand if you do information architecture at your work? Yes, you are definitely all at the right conference.
Except for that guy.
He comes to all the conferences. I can't remember the point that I was going to make. Oh, so I think it's so weird that we're sort of looking at another field like data science. Like that, first of all, just to be clear, plays no role in my world at all. So like I just don't interact with that. I design websites, design web applications, we work on digital products, and frankly, that I think is the requirement for information architecture to exist, right? If you have digital products, you need information architecture, right? There's no other field that sort of can catalyze the need for information architecture. The environment in which digital products live will constantly change. They will get far more complex, as I've seen over my career, as you have seen over your careers. As that complexity changes, so too the pressure on information architecture continues, right? It has never let up, in my opinion. We just, as an industry, pay attention to it more or less. But the need is always there. I don't know why it's diminished. I have some theories. I think if I espouse those theories in this particular venue, I might get in trouble. But I do think as we're trying to educate massive numbers of user experience designers, some things fall by the wayside. Because, newsflash, information architecture is hard. It's like really hard. That's one of the things that keeps my mind engaged with it, right? It's hard to do, hard to think about, hard to conceptualize, hard to visualize, hard to explain to other people, right? All of those things make it hard, which make it very difficult to teach as well.
Okay, no more raise your hand surveys, but let's turn it to for Q&A, unless you guys want to top it off with anything. Okay, anybody have questions of this group?
Raise our hand.
I'm going to get Lisa first.
So I wanted to respond to something I just heard, because I've been hearing all day today that machine learning is not adequate and that there have to be human-entered filters on those things, metadata, parameters. If you don't have people looking at what the machines are learning, they're going to not provide the right information or the right conclusions. And we keep hearing stories in the news about how, you know, like garbage in, garbage out, right? The algorithms are only as good as what they're provided. To me, that seems like a huge opportunity for an information architect practice to be providing those parameters. And I think it's completely relevant to the work that's going on today. You know, however that is presented to the end user, whether that's on a screen or in a voice-activated UI or what have you. The choices you make in a voice-activated UI as to, if you're asking for something and you get one answer back, how do you pick that? I mean, to me, that's I mean, you could say some of it's content strategy and it blurs into information architecture, but, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's completely relevant. So I guess it's not a question, but more a comment. But if you all have thoughts on that,
I would
then
completely
like to.
agree, because, like you said, right, you designed websites and you designed digital products. Increasingly, those digital products are going to start using AI in the background, right? Increasingly, it's going to happen.
Try.
They're going to try, and it's going to happen without. Eventually, it's going to get to the point where you won't know that there's AI in the background, right? So you're designing a digital product which is using AI in the background. And so there's a lot of correlations there. And yes, tagging that data is very important, and understanding that data and having humans look at that data. We were just recently worked on an engagement where that was a big thing, right? I was like, we have to be able to explain. There's a concept of explainability in AI, which is you have to be able to explain what the algorithm did. There's supervised learning, there's unsupervised learning, there's all kinds of things that you can get into with AI. But it is, how do you explain that and where did it come from, right? And so for what we were doing, it was a proof of concept, but we really dug deep into, we had people looking at that data, right? So we can compare what the machine is saying to what a human sort of would, how they would categorize that. And that's how we built our model. So you could go back and really show what happened here, right? And that's where then understanding that data, creating those structures and parameters and the tags and labels that you need to create, organizing it, right? Feeding it and training it in that manner become really important. So I do believe that it's very important if you want your AI to be explainable, which really has a very clear line between explainability and fairness and bias and ethics and all these other things in AI.
So Jared, earlier on you mentioned the idea of this table that people are being brought to, or that table that is supposed to be there. So on the other side of that, there are folks who actually decide what that table is and who to invite. How does the title of information architecture or any title impact how early on they're brought to that table or not? Because it does impact, or it does have an impact on the projects and how information architecture can influence the end result that we work with. So how can we reconcile that with regards to the titling of someone?
So there's a whole bunch of things to unpack in that question. First, when you first started talking about tables, we were just talking about data science, and I immediately went to data tables, and I'm like, what tables are information architects in? The employee table, I guess. So talking about the table that, as far as I know, does not exist. If you get invited to the table, you just get to go to more meetings. Is really what happens. What we're really talking about is, or what people seem to talk about when they talk about being invited to the table, is they want to be part of the conversations that lock certain constraints down earlier in the project than they're currently getting involved in. So, we're all sitting in projects and these requirements come down, these constraints come down, and we're sort of having to work within these walls that we didn't pick. And had we been in that conversation, we would have argued to pick a different wall. And so that seems to be it. And I don't think this is about one discipline over another. I don't think that, interaction designers have more right to be in those conversations than information architects, or that user researchers need to be there. But I think that the problem is, and I just wrote a piece about this earlier this week, is that we're not getting the information we need, and we don't have the literacy in the organization to be able to have the conversation where people are even thinking about this. Because, a lot of those conversations end with the phrase, well, how hard could that be? And it turns out that it's probably really hard, and it's really hard because someone without any experience understanding that, yes, we have all this data about our users, but they don't talk to each other. I was talking with a product manager at Intuit a few months ago, a guy named Sam Nordstrom. He's in charge of the QuickBooks project. And he wanted to build up their data science practice. And he spent the first year working with a bunch of software developers, for the most part, dealing with the fact that they have three main data stores. They have all of the transactions that people do with QuickBooks, which is a business finance package. So, when you make a deposit, when you invoice a customer, they have all that transaction stuff. They have all the information about their customers, which is who owns which license and how many people have access to that license. And then they have all the information about their actual behavior, who clicks on this button, who clicks on that button. And those 3 data stores weren't talking to each other, and they didn't even have a common language to describe a customer or a user such that they could tie a user to a license, a user's click to a license to a transaction that license enabled, right? And to be able to do the type of analysis they wanted to do, that was all information architecture work at some level. They're creating this giant taxonomy of data across these independent databases that were built at different times by different people without talking to each other, you know, like we do. And as a result, it took them a year just to be able to do a simple analysis of how much money would we make if more people use that piece of functionality. And that was what they were driving towards. And it turned out that, you know, the number came out to hundreds of millions of dollars, but it took them a year just to be able to get to that point. And so I think the issue is that as Dan was saying, and what everybody's been saying, is that the skills and experience from doing information architecture work gets you into some really deep, gnarly problems that are architectural in nature, people in nature, they're social, and they, you know, how do we just extract meaning? There's a discussion going online about, that Andrew Hinton started again, about the word friend in Facebook, and how, what does a friend really mean in Facebook? Because I have people who I am linked to who are not the same as other people who I am linked to in terms of the friendships I have. So what is a friend on Facebook? And why are some of these people Trump supporters? I don't understand. And so we have all these sort of social connotations. And when we teach at Center, when we teach the students, information architecture is one of the first courses we teach, so that foundation is laid, and we can keep coming back to, well, when you're building a menu, this is what it is, but when you're building the database, this is what it is. And when you're actually talking about social interactions, this is what it is. And we keep coming back to that as a foundation. Anyways, I hope I answered your question.
Anybody else want to add to that, or no? Okay.
Or subtract.
Okay, I know there's more questions. I'll come to you next. Yeah.
Because this is I think a panel about sort of defining information architecture, I'm going to ask an obvious question and kind of touch on something that someone mentioned, that teaching it is hard. I did take a class, I think it was in 2014 at University of Baltimore, called Information Architecture. The definition I believe we were provided was the organization, labeling, and structure of information, kind of a basic definition. Is that true? Is that still the definition? Like, yes or no, and how might you update it or expand upon it today?
So I just taught an information architecture class, just a workshop, just a one-day thing, but
You brought notes.
but because I can't remember anything. And I started with a definition. I asked the participants how they defined information architecture. Most of them were around the organization or navigation of websites, but I have several. So to me, there's IA as a practice, which is just pretty much what you, actually, as a practice, it's a branch of knowledge concerned with the design, construction, and organization of information. And then the IA, what we call the IA of something, the information architecture something, is the system of organization, classification, labeling, and structure used in an information space. So, and then an IA is someone who practices that. So when we, but I think this is a thing, and bringing up Andrew, he just tweeted a little while ago, he's down in Atlanta at World IA Day, and he mentioned semantics and this, and I was like, my response, I haven't seen what followed on from that, was wait, words have meaning? But as we've seen here, we see everywhere, almost every presentation I give, I start with definitions. This is what I'm talking about, this is what it means, this is how it's different to other words that I have heard been ascribed with the same meaning. So I think that it's really important for not so much to define the damn thing, but to define what it is in any given context, and to push that out to the people we're working with so that they have a bigger understanding of what this is and why it's important. I mean, I love that you were talking about Intuit. Like, there was a business reason for doing that year of work, was how do we make more money? And if we can, and that was another part of the workshop, was
And deliver more value.
well, right, but you have to, like, there's a business value for practicing IA, and sometimes it's more tangible than others. But if, as a practice, all of us started talking more about how it matters to other people, how what we do can help other people meet their goals, I think, and be less dogmatic about what our title is or what it is we do or what we went to school for, whatever, then I think we would get a lot farther.
Yeah.
Okay, at the risk of beating a dead horse, back to this modern abomination of corporate job titles. The last 3 titles I've had have been various iterations of content strategist. All the jobs have been totally and completely different, but each one has directly led to being able to get the next one. And how did I become a content strategist initially? I went on LinkedIn, I changed my headline to say content strategist. The recruiters just started pouring in. So I propose right here today, World IA Day 2020, let's start the revolution. When you leave here, go home, open up the latest version of your resume. Wherever there's a job title, replace it with a headline, like you would see on a newspaper or a website, the big picture takeaway of what you accomplished there, what value you added, with the bullet points below being the story of how you actually got there. And conversely, the same thing, if you've got a job board, you're writing job ads, same thing. Replace the title with a headline of what the person will actually be doing, what the need is, and how they'll be expected to do it. Let's be the change we want.
You are what you LinkedIn.
Anybody have a question?
Hi. So, like Natalie, I'm at a federal agency, and I think, like a lot of government and NGO places, if we get to hire, that is like once in a blue moon, throw a party, that's amazing. But usually we're marching with the army we have, and we're trying to upskill people who have never studied any of this UX or IA stuff at all. So my question to you guys is, how do you upskill in this? How do you take a team that's never heard of this and get them doing it, get them practicing it without sending them to grad school?
Okay. So there was no grad school for IA when I was growing up.
And then suddenly there was, right?
And then yeah. And I got too far down the road. So Jared's special friend Dana has stories about making change in large organizations. And I don't remember all those stories, but I do remember her saying something about kind of small incremental changes. And one of those things that you can do is run a study. Just have the engineers, like, sorry to steal your thunder, man, but it's a really good story of just like have the engineers sit in on a usability test or whatever it is. Well, IAs have something awesome that is relatively easy to do. You can do it just about anybody, is a card sort. And there's something very powerful about watching people try and sort a set of 40 terms into different categories. And I feel like I appreciate what Carrie's saying about how, you know, it's not just the navigation, but let's be honest, navigation is like the most accessible thing, most tangible thing that we do as information architects. Let them mess around with the navigation. Like, how would we do this better? because that leads to a cascade of conversations. Now, I say all that, never actually having, that I can recall, like done something like that. But I think there should be more card sorting in the world. And so, yeah, I feel good about that.
But you asked how can people get the IA skills?
Oh, I think
So,
that's a great
yeah,
question.
it was a very good answer to
There
some
was a
question.
question out there.
It's like it's the final Jeopardy question.
It is Washington, D.C. So.
So I think there are several books. That's one way to learn, but
Abby's book.
yes,
But I
there.
think what I was getting
but
at was
yeah.
learn by doing.
Yeah. So and there's conferences. There's the IA conference, which is in April. There's lots of workshops there, including IA Essentials taught by Jorge Arango, who it would be fabulous. If I were just starting, I would love to take his class. But well, except that he's teaching the same time as me, so then I'd have to find someone to teach my workshop.
Field trip.
So there's not a lot, but there are some things. There's also Lisa Maria Martin's new book, Information Architecture Essentials, or Essential Information or something like that. I think it's EIA. Every day, yeah. So that's also a really good start. And then, but don't get stuck just reading and taking classes. Do it. And I think that's one of the great things to plug the IA conference, which is my favorite conference, is you can have those conversations there. You get new ideas. You can have conversations with people who are doing it and learning it at the same time. So I think that's really important to have these types of events where you can learn new ideas, take them back, and then do them. And you don't have to do it for a big project. Do one thing on one project and have it spread.
So
I want
I
to.
would just- sorry, no.
I just want to plug two things that are federal.
Yeah.
One is open opportunities. Have you ever seen that? Yeah, that. You're kidding me. Okay, that's another thing. And then the UX Government Summit, which is coming up, and it's free on May 12th. Sorry, Fatima.
Oh, I was just going to say, not specific to just learning IA. Things are changing very fast in this world, right? There's constantly need to upskill and learn new skills, and how do you do that is going to apply across the board for if it's IA skills today or if it's, AI skills tomorrow, what have you, right? I think there are a lot of online courses too. There are a lot of online free courses that you can take. There are universities online, right? There's, you may have to pay a little bit, but there's a whole lot that you can do on your own. Reading books is a great way, but also just these online courses with me allow you to actually practice some hands-on learning in a non-class, non-grad school environment.
Can I plug a thing? Is that tacky? It's a little tacky. But I came up with something that may help you. It's called Information Architecture Lenses. And it's basically a deck of cards with lots of hard questions on them and questions about information architecture things. I believe we're giving one away at part of the raffle.
Oh, great.
It's helpful if I show the front of it. But follow IA Lenses on Twitter. And this is a set of 50-ish questions about structure, about navigation, about managing information that are all relevant. And I've talked to teams who have brought this deck to conversations when they're talking about user experience in general, and use these questions to help stimulate deeper conversations about structure. Apparently I have another deck of cards. And my understanding is it is freaking amazing. Is that those are the exact? I made a game called Surviving Design Projects. It has nothing to do with information architecture, but it has everything to do with
The cards are labeled.
the cards are labeled. Actually, well, surviving design projects. So it's like plays like Apples to Apples. Anyone know Apples to Apples? Cards Against Humanity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more a Cards Against Humanity crowd, I think. But it's a storytelling game where you tell a story about a difficult situation on a design project in a safe space that is at your lunch, and then everyone plays a card to kind of figure out how would we deal with this difficult situation. I'm told, again, freaking amazing, interesting. It's a new one. Thank you.
We've been working with teams, because this is a problem that comes up all the time, and it's not just information architecture, it's all different dimensions of design. And so the way we focus this is we start with outcomes. So we start with what we call a UX outcome. A UX outcome is how would you, if you did a fantastic job building whatever it is you're building, how will you improve someone's life, right? So being able to get the whole team to answer that question turns out to be really crucial, because once we can sort of get to that, how does someone's life improve if we do a fantastic job of what we're doing? Then we can sort of backtrack and say, okay, what's preventing the people whose lives we're trying to improve? What's preventing them from just doing that today? And that shows the work that we have to get done to get to that outcome. And then from there, we can ask the question, what skills do we need to get to that point? And that allows us to not fixate on, well, does everybody have to understand what an ontology is? We can worry about ontologies, or at least the element of ontologies that we need to be able to solve those problems. So we're starting with the end in mind, and then working our way backwards to say, what is it that we need to accomplish? And then we can just start the work. And as people have said, you can go to books, you can go to courses, but what we've learned at Center is the most important thing is taking that work and applying it directly to a project with a coach, with someone who says, okay, you read that book, you went to that course, now how does that apply to what we are trying to do right now, right here? And to get that experiential learning element into it. And if you can get that experiential learning element into it, you can start to change people, and they don't have to know the theoretical name of the thing they just did, right? They just have to know that when they built out this system of words, they were building a taxonomy. They don't have to know they built a taxonomy. They just have to know that they built out a system of words that made sense, and card sorting was a great technique to figure out that system of words, and they built it into the menus or the categorization or whatever it is, and went from there.
Yeah, we can fit in one last question, so you got here first.
Okay. So this is my first World IA Day, and learning a lot. It's great. Being here in person makes a big difference between being on Twitter and learning stuff and taking online classes. Is between the panel and the audience, are there other events, meetups aside from this one that happens once a year that we can continue learning? Do you guys know of any?
There's UX Camp. UX Camp DC, which I come to every year.
Are you talking about local events or national?
Local, national, but one of them once a year.
I mean, there's so much.
Yeah.
So once a year.
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
Well, I don't go anywhere. I like staying at home.
His wife does not let him out.
It's not true. Locally, there's Refresh DC, there's Nova UX, there is something else, UXDC, and UXPA, thank you. Apparently there's both UXDC and DCUX meetup. I don't care to know the difference between them.
Taxonomy problem.
And yeah, the show that Carrie mentioned, the IA conference, has been going for 20 years now. I went to the first one in Boston. I met one of my best friends at the 2002. He and I are still friends together. He's godfather to my children. So that is a very awesome conference.
It's my favorite conference of all.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
You run conferences, man.
This is being recorded, right?
So there's a lot. I would say Nova UX locally is probably the one that there's also a MoCo, Montgomery County UX, that doesn't meet quite as frequently. Jenny Reddish runs a meetup.
the STCA, SCT, the
The Plain
Society
Language Conference?
of Society of Technical Communicators.
Well, she doesn't run that.
Does it? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
there's a lot, man.
There's a content strategy meetup that is sometimes active. It's not active right now.
Yeah, and Ginny's run some
Yeah.
conferences, but she's retired, and I
Yeah.
don't think
So,
She's allowed to run
also,
conferences.
She
you-
presented at one recently.
I invite anybody
Yeah,
to
I
make
know. Yeah,
an
yeah, I
IA
know.
meetup. You could make an IA meetup. All you have to do is go to meetup.com and plug it in. So, yeah, I think that it is important. I think that's a great question. There are annual events that happen. If you put them all together, you could go to many. But I think it is important to go to events and have these discussions with people, and not just in 280 characters on Twitter. But you can maintain those relationships online. There's lots of communities, online communities as well, that are mostly, at least the ones I know of, revolve around content strategy and UX. But IA is there's a content strategy plus UX Slack team that has an IA channel plus taxonomy channel and some other things that are IA related. So there's some of us there that are more focused on that. But there's lots of things, and there's always room for more, especially as we said, the need for information architecture grows, whether or not you call yourself an IA.
That was a wonderful ending. Thank you all. Thank you for your time, and thank you, audience, for your wonderful questions. So.